Good morning, viewers and Zena family. Today, I thank Rajiv ji to give me a platform to interview a very distinguished poet. Our guest for today is Sukrita Paul Kumar. She is a distinguished poet and a writer, and she wears many caps with her. She's also a trainer and before we start interviewing her, I would just like to introduce her a little bit. So, Sukrita Paul Kumarji is a poet whose words beautifully capture human emotions. And beyond her literary achievements, she has also played a role in mentoring young people. And her poetry invites us to pause, reflect, and also feel the layers of our experiences. Please join me warmly in welcoming Sukrita Paul Kumarji.
Thank you.
So, ma'am, I will start the interview with a very simple question. You've worn many hats, that of a writer, a critic, a translator. So, in all these identities, which is the closest to your heart?
I think because all of this unifies in the heart, it
Ji.
doesn't become one activity, doesn't get distinguished from the other because they're all connected. They're very deeply connected. It's not as if
Ji.
I'm on the one hand, even if it were to be on the one hand being, involved in sciences and on the other hand involved in art, etc. I think somewhere all of this links up with each other. So to my mind, I've always been a very holistic kind of a person. So even
Ji.
if I've been teaching literature for many, many years or writing poetry, I do feel that even teaching literature is very, very creative.
Ji.
And so these things connect with each other. I don't see one thing more important to me than the other. Because when
Ji.
I'm translating, for instance, even in the process of translating, I need to be very creative. I think the linking that happens between or amongst all these different things that I do is the whole idea of creativity and trying to be as original as possible and trying to acquire whatever skills that are required in that particular domain. So it's all got to do with, the tools of expression, creative expression. So the creative expression could be through, obviously, poetry is one major thing, but also I paint. And so my, color becomes, words are not the only tool, that
Okay.
I also, color, brushes, they also become a tool for me. And so
Okay.
does teaching. So ultimately, it is really creativity that matters, to what extent I can be creative. If I'm low at that level, creativity level, then obviously I am not fulfilled in whatever I do. The moment of fulfillment comes only when I'm totally holistically involved in that act, whether it be that of teaching or writing poetry or translating or any of the others. So all the
Okay.
caps get united into one particular domain, a big hat, right?
Okay.
Hmm.
So nice to hear that. So आप जो poetry लिखते हैं, I've just gone through a few of them. They're very deep and emotional. So आपका where does the thought emerge from? It's like from life experiences or some memories or quite observation of people around you.
See, these again, they are not to be delinked because,
Okay.
memory is not only that of the past.
Right.
Memory, when it comes to the present moment, it's the
Right.
past which becomes the present, right?
Right.
So it's not as if it remains limited to a certain kind of a framed past, and
Ji.
therefore it is a memory. So, and then also maybe it could be just a plant, the oddity of a certain kind of a plant that might
Ji.
trigger off through obviously observation. You suddenly stop, and when you are attentive, I think that's the key word. When you're attentive to whatever is happening around you, wherever you
Ji.
are, and what happens is that that attention level, as J. Krishnamurti tells us very clearly, that attention is very important. Listening is very important. So when
जी
all your senses are very alert and you're observing very attentively, then
जी
obviously you see something slightly different from the ordinary. You hear something different from the ordinary. And that extraordinariness is what is called inspirational. That
जी
inspires you to pause there a little more, and the thought element also comes in it. Obviously, there is emotion. The first instance is that of emotional awakening. But after that, immediately, there is also thought that enters into emotion. And it's a mix of emotion and thought, which produces a certain kind of a narrative around what you are observing. And that
जी जी
narrative, though it be in the form of either a painting or it could be in the form of a poem, that narrative is very poetic then, and that poetic,
right
whatever is poetic, obviously, if it is relating with you at a very deep level, then the expression also has to be at that very level. So you struggle to find the right words. Sometimes you need to struggle. Sometimes they
जी
come very easily. You agonize over the expression. And then very easily the words begin to fall in place, and
जी
a certain kind of lyrical reflection happens, a lyrical reflection, which is
right right
flowing, and you are reflecting. And so, how can you again dissociate emotion from intellect? They come
right
together. They come together.
yes,
Otherwise, it would be very boring. If it is just emotional, it dwindles into sentimental. It
absolutely
becomes very sentimental, and your mind discards it after a while. It only
Mhm.
has a little life of maybe a few moments, that's it. And then it's off you, then it disappears. But if the moment of emotion also gets into reflection and thought, then it acquires a greater staying power. It is enduring then. And it also has that kind of an impact on your own self. And uh,
right
and that's very something very interesting, Rashmi. When you
yeah
write something and you feel, okay, it's coming on the paper, and then
right
suddenly you feel, oh my God, is that me? Is this line mine? Because there is another level of consciousness that takes over. And that
right right
consciousness is not the ordinary consciousness of every moment in your life. No. But
जी
those
जी
moments which make you create are extraordinary moments, are
absolutely
inspirational moments. So when you catch that moment truthfully, it becomes a poem.
okay so आपने what was the age when you started writing I mean
I've
I'm
always,
sure
I can't remember any time when I wasn't writing, but
okay
reading and writing has always been with me, particularly literature. And I think I was a child, I was brought up in Kenya, and
जी
my father was very keen that we should know, my parents were very keen that we should know Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi quite well. And
right
it was not very easy to, remain in touch with our own languages, because all education was, particularly in British times, that's when I was
right
brought up. All the education was actually by English teachers, English men and English women were teaching us. So it was English education, which also happens in India to a large extent. But if you're taught by the natives of that language, then it becomes more English than the English that ordinarily you hear, right?
right
So we
right
were kind of very much impacted with that. So even if I was exposed to Hindi and Urdu, but the strange thing is, though I was doing a lot of English, but my first poem actually came out in Hindi, and I lost in touch. I actually lost touch with Hindi eventually.
okay
As a
okay
child, I had some Hindi in me, because my father's passion it was that we should children should know Hindi, Urdu, as I said, and
right
so magazines were brought from they were sent for from India. So that I used to get Chanda Mama and Bal Bharti and Parag and such like magazines. And
right right
so it was, my first poem was in Hindi. I don't even have that poem now. I don't have it at all. So it was published in Parag, first and
okay
foremost. I think I was just about 8 or 9 years of age at that time.
Oh my God,
And I was
that's
very, very thrilled when this was published. But somewhere it was always taken for granted in me that I am a poet, that basically I am a poet. So even if, of course, professionally you go in a different direction, it's not all
yeah.
that different because I was teaching literature. I was in touch with the teaching and learning of poetry. But
Ji.
English, it just became all English eventually. Because as a child, I was exposed to these languages for a little while. And after
Right.
that, again, other languages went into the background and only English remained. But the point is that even if ultimately I have been writing in English because of the habit of the pen, etc., but in the background always looms my Hindi and Urdu and Punjabi, through which I emerged as a poet.
Okay. So, Aapki, there are so many poems of yours. So, which one of them is the closest to your heart, and what inspired you to write it? And can you read out that poem if you have it here?
I have a lot of poems around, and I don't think I'd like to distinguish between my favorite and the non favorite ones
Okay, okay.
because, again, I don't, just as I don't know if you have the experience of being a mother. And
Yeah,
if if you are a mother of two more than one child, will
actually.
you be able to distinguish who is the better
No, no,
one? Even if one is very wicked and very naughty, you are not going to say you don't like that child, but
obviously.
you
Huh?
like this. So it's like that. So yeah, I have these books of poems in front of me. Like
Okay,
my this is the book which is called Salt and Pepper. And this is
okay.
what got me an award, Rabindranath Tagore Award, just
Wow,
two
congratulations.
years ago. Thank you. This is about 2 years ago. And
Okay,
this has a lot of a selection of my poems. So usually I use this when I'm reading poetry outside, this particular
okay,
volume. But there's another volume which I'm going to read out a poem from. And this is
okay.
called Country Drive. And by the
Right.
way, the painting that you see on the cover is my own painting.
Oh,
And
that's beautiful.
yeah, so this is called Country Drive, and this was a collaborative kind of a project I did with Yasmin Lada, who is a Canadian poet, and she and I wrote poems on kind of similar categories that we formed, such
Okay.
as I mean, women, of course, was one category, but
Mm-hmm.
borders and other like ideas that we had. And then she wrote and I wrote, and then we decided to put that together. And so let me read, if I were to read one poem to you right now, I think I would like to read, um, I call it Vaga, right?
Okay.
At Vaga. And you know what I mean by that when I say Vaga?
What do you mean by that?
Vaga. Are you familiar with the Vaga? Vaga
Right.
is the border town,
Border, yeah, Vaga border,
right?
yeah.
Vaga border. So this is basically the poem is called Vaga,
Okay.
and I will read this out to you. It's called At Vaga, actually.
Okay.
So let me read this. At Vaga, I love you the most. The border marked by the spectacle of stomping army boots, shining metals, beating their chests into the rising and setting of the sun. The day becomes night and the night day, when the guards on both sides change bang bang. I love you the most at Wagah. When the guns are raised to salute separation, division, rupture, when the neighbor dies and wears the shroud, becomes enemy all at once, my friend, you go away only as a bird does, flying in the free skies when the lines of hatred rise against prayer flags. Vaga happens. And I love you the most because you are on the other side of the border. That's it. So
Beautiful. I
that's
mean,
one
I
thing.
I'm also a Fauji wife,
Oh, okay.
so I can relate to that. My
Right, right.
husband was in the Indian Navy. He's taken a
Okay.
VRS and he's working with a private firm. But
Uh-huh.
the way you've written about the lives of soldiers, even the families. It's beautiful, beautifully penned down. Really
Thank you.
very
Thank
emotional.
you. Thank you. Mm.
So, yesterday, I think you had a session at Jindal University, right?
That's right. Oh,
So,
you've been
like
keeping
what?
a track of me. All right.
Because my son is also studying in OP Jindal Law College.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, how was the event? Like, what was it about, and how was it?
I think it was nice because there was a good, serious kind of a discussion on
Okay,
poetry and
okay.
so on. And did your son attend it? No.
No, no, he's as of now he's doing internship here.
Okay. Mhm.
He's working with a law firm. So
Okay.
when I told him, he said, "Oh, I wanted to attend, but obviously he could not
Yeah.
because of
Yeah.
reasons."
Yeah. So it was a good discussion because I think it's very important that not just
Right.
the students but young colleagues, etc. They are many of them are teaching poetry and are reading poetry, and even those who are not reading poetry, I think it
The
can
young
be a
generation.
very it can be
Sorry.
a very it can be a very transformative experience,
Okay. Okay.
reading poetry. It can change a person because if you keep reading, not only does it sensitize you to many
Yeah.
different angles and dimensions of living life, but also to other people, like in this very poem, how you can what is perceived as an enemy, whoever that may be on the other side of the border. On the
Yeah.
other side of the border is always the enemy. One realizes that at a theoretical level, but it's a human being, and you can love the enemy. And so you love the other because you begin to see the humanity on both sides of the border, right?
Right. Right.
So I think
So,
it was interesting.
yeah, I wish I could have attended, but
Mhm, mhm.
so, Sukrita ji, like Ajkal, the young generation of today, they are mostly into short, short reels, and the habit of reading is, I think, really going down. So, poetry, very few people, I mean, they relate to it. So, any message or any tips you would like to give for the young generation
Yeah,
about your,
you know, judging from the number of poetry events that are happening, I
yeah,
don't think it's going down at all. I think
okay,
more and
okay,
more people are exposed to poetry.
right,
And
right,
mostly you find, there's a hall full of people in front of you when you're reading your poems. Most of
yes,
the
yes,
times you feel there's a lot of, inquiry into what is poetry, how do you define poetry, what does it do to oneself, and then I think those are good opportunities to actually talk to also the young people
right,
and to sort of make them realize that poetry is, yes, it can stir an emotion in you, but it's not just an emotion. It does
right,
much more than that. It sensitizes you to so many different aspects of life which otherwise are not available to your eye, particularly of the kind of life that we are leading in today's world, which is very
yes,
fast, and
true,
there are shortcuts that are always found from one place to
absolutely,
another, one kind of, and professions don't have any space for literature generally. You're only thinking of skills of various kinds, but in order to become a reasonably good human being, and that is primary, no matter what your profession is, I think it's
right,
important to read poetry, it's important to read literature in order to understand humanity and your own self. It also leads you to self realization, you know.
absolutely.
Mm.
So, your profession makes you travel, I think, all over India. So, any particular incident which you remember really touched your heart? Would you
Well,
like to share that?
I would say that, uh, uh, I travel. Yes, I travel a lot, not only because I get invited to different places, that is a
Right,
different kind of an occasion. But even if I'm invited, what I do is I do the event, very conscientiously, dutifully, I do it. But I always take some time off to just meander and wander around the place on my own. I think that is very important. If I'm put alone in some situation, I'm never lonely. I'm alone, but I'm never lonely because there's so
right,
much happening in the mind. And then I go that, and unnecessarily people say, oh, but if you are, how do you realize yourself and all? Unless you take a journey inward, an inward journey. And that inward journey can come only if you give yourself the opportunity to be with yourself. And so, what I do usually is when I travel, you refer to my traveling, and
Right.
I just take, say, two weeks off or 3 weeks off whenever I can from whatever I'm doing. And I go away. For instance, last year I had gone to Puri, and I
Right.
took a place and I stayed there, and I spent a lot of time with the ocean. And with that ocean, I was writing, thinking, not doing anything, and yet feeling very fulfilled, because the
Right.
thoughts you have to watch your thoughts. How are the thoughts moving within you? And watching those thoughts itself are happenings, because you've never given a chance for your mind to come alive,
Right.
quietly,
Right.
or emotions to come alive quietly. So I have been giving this opportunity to myself, and those are the happenings that stay as poetry, because
Right.
those it's like a happening. It's something that happens. You might meet a stranger with whom you end up having a long conversation. I have a whole lot of poems, for instance. This is not about the stranger that's another poem that I have in mind. But I was by the side of Ganga, beyond Rishikesh. I went and stayed there for a little while, and somehow I developed some kind of a dialogue with Ganga. And this dialogue with Ganga runs into about 20, 30 pages of my poetry, which I
Right.
have written. And somebody has published a whole booklet called Dialogues with Ganga.
Wow.
Red River. It's a chapbook that has come out just about 4 or 5 months ago. And this
Okay.
chapbook has come out because this person who read them thought that it made a whole book by itself. So let me publish a chapbook, he said, and I said welcome to that. And so it's a whole series of dialogues that happen with Ganga, which is already full of stories, right? So much of mythology that you have around Ganga. So it is
Right.
something like a persona that is beginning to relate to you as you are sitting there in the flow of Ganga. And all those stories that you have read also come alive, and you start creating new stories, right? And in the creation of new stories, then verses come, and then you start writing. So I have these. So that was a happening to me. It was a great happening. And I carried that Ganga in my mind, came back to Delhi, and continued with the dialogue, continued to write that dialogue. So it was so fascinating to do it for myself, very, very fulfilling. And then by itself, it stops. At some points, it's over, And then I
Yeah.
stopped writing. It looked as though it was done. I had done my dialogue. I don't know when I might just pick it up again. That is the
Right.
beauty of writing, because there's so much of non-predictability. You can't even predict how your creativity is going to take you where. And that's
Right.
the
Right.
beauty. But you have to give it a chance, no? You have to give it. If you're in a crowd all the time, trying to compete with other people, trying to, muster as much attention as possible, collect as many awards as possible, then you're not writing poetry. Then you're looking after some kind of success. And
Right.
that
Right.
success is going to be your downfall.
That's a very interesting piece of tip you've given. So, I mean, continuing with this thought, there are many poets I've seen, I've also met, that they have a lot of collection, but they are very skeptical and they're careful not to share it with people. So, any uh, guidelines you would like to share for them?
I didn't get the question actually, that they're
I mean, there
skeptical
are many,
about.
yeah, there are many poets. They've written
Mm.
books, they have written poetries, but
Mm.
they're very scared to, they're very shy to get it
Yeah,
published.
yeah, that's also because there is a very false sense of privacy. One has
Yeah,
to understand that poetry, when you're communicating with
right,
yourself, and it's not a diary, you're looking for metaphors, you're looking for, after all, language is social. Using
right,
language is social activity. Our communication, it's a social activity.
Right.
It cannot be private. But that is the irony. But it's very personal. What is very personal can become very impersonal if you find the right words for it. And that's when you realize, and many of us, poets don't realize that
Yeah.
what we think of as private or personal, very personal, and therefore you are shy or fearful or whatever, you
Right.
don't want
Right.
to read out. Actually, it's wrong to do that because your poem becomes a poem when it reaches the other. Otherwise, it's
Absolutely.
a diary item. Otherwise, sit and write your diary, keep filling it
Yeah.
up,
Right.
keep filling
Right.
it up and read it yourself and wallow in your sadness or happiness or whatever. But the moment you read it out to somebody else, and in fact, to my mind, when I'm writing a poem, it's always been like that. When I write a poem and it's complete, I wanted to quickly send it away. Like, it's a very conventional kind of an imagery, but like when the daughter gets married and goes away, right?
Yeah.
Okay, done. The parent also feels the responsibility is done. Of course, there is a great rapport between the parent and the girl child. That's not what
Right.
I'm
Right.
trying to say. But what I'm saying is that it goes into a different domain, right? It's
Right.
out of yourself, and the poem becomes a poem when it reaches the other people, irrespective of where. It could be across the seven seas. No, I was very surprised when somebody from Japan wrote to me and, in fact,
Right.
translated my poetry into Japanese, and a book came out,
Oh,
you know. And I realized, when I was talking to her on the phone the other day, I realized that some of my poems had acquired a different shape and meaning according to her. I mean, according to
okay.
me, it meant something else. But
Right. Right.
but in her mind, it worked somewhere like her own self, her
Her
own
perception was different.
experience.
Right. Yeah.
Her own experience, basically. It's
Yeah.
not just a perception, but it
Mm-hmm.
creates a different experience in one reader as compared to the other reader. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
itself is very fascinating, to see how poetry, but you are no longer, you need not be possessive about it. Being private is one thing, but being
Right.
possessive is even worse. You need not be possessive about what you have written, because, as I said, you don't know what level of consciousness you get into when you are writing
Right.
poetry.
Right.
And
Right.
that level of consciousness, you yourself at the superficial level don't realize it. That's why you're surprised. Many poets say, I say that the poem has a calling. It calls for attention. The poem you write is not you writing, but it's another level of consciousness which has responded to a certain idea, a certain emotion, and then you write it as though you are possessed. You must have heard of that, when you as if you are in a frenzy. It's another self that is gotten over you. And you do
Right.
that until it is over. You are struggling and you are battling with it. And finally, when it is done, you're very surprised when you read it. It doesn't seem like you because of the ordinary self, that may have written it.
Right.
So it's very, even today, psychologists are, struggling to understand what is the creative process. We
Right.
don't know. There is a sense of mystery to it. And I hope that mystery is kept alive. I hope that AI doesn't take over.
I sincerely hope that,
Yeah.
because AI cannot take over emotions. Never, ever.
So there would be a tussle. For some time, people would be diffident. But I'm
Right.
sure that the human element will again rise and, call out for attention.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
So, if not a poet, what other profession would you have been in?
No, poetry is not a profession. I
Like,
won't
yeah,
call
yeah.
it, but
Given
but
a
I, I
choice.
but I was teaching in the university. I mean, I
Okay.
retired as a professor, so
Okay.
I have been teaching, and I love teaching.
Okay.
But the one thing I must mention, I loved teaching literature, but I never taught poetry. I did not want
Okay.
to teach poetry because I wanted to write poetry and not teach. If you start teaching, that element of teaching can enter into your poetry and spoil it all.
Right. Right. So, one last question for you.
Hmm.
So, for if you could just leave our audience with a thought about literature, creativity, or life, what would it be?
Well, as I said, I think literature is life to me. And if it is my life, literature, whether I'm writing or reading, yes, I think even when I'm reading, reading is also a creative act. If one is not writing, at least if one is reading, and if you submit yourself to your reading, you are submitting yourself to another person's writing. And if another person's writing comes alive to you, this is how you proliferate the whole idea of the pooling of ideas and a collectivity of humanity turns out, isn't it that
Right.
way? So I think one needs to creatively read, write, and remain a poet at heart, even if you're an engineer.
Okay.
Mm.
So, thank you, Sukritaji, for
Thank
reminding us
you.
that poetry is just not written in books, but it is also that it lives in our hearts
That's
and
right.
in our experiences and all the stories we carry.
That's right. That's right. In fact, it elevates you from petty ideas, you know.
Right, right.
Sometimes you can squabble over petty ideas, but if the it lifts you, it transcends you, and you begin to realize that there's something more to life than just getting stuck in
Yeah,
mire about little small politics of life.
actually.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
it was lovely connecting with you and wishing you all the very best for all your future projects and would love to read the book on Ganga. I mean, it sounds
Sure.
very beautifully penned, so I would really love to read it. So
Thank you.
please do stay connected and wishing you all the best. And just as a parting line, just one line for the Zena family. I
Well,
mean, so, yeah,
I don't think it would be any different to Zena family as compared to what all I've been saying for everybody else also.
yeah,
I think the sharing that can happen through poetry and through painting also. I mean, that's what I do. If I'm stuck in words, I start painting. I start picking up my brushes and colors and so on. I think
right.
creative expression should be in the center of our experience. And Zena family can grow bigger and more connected if only this kind of sharing happens more and more. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely connecting with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.